Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. Michael Cohen swears he's telling the truth about all the lies he told. Let that sink in. The prosecution's star witness is being praised by left-wing pundits for admitting he lied, admitting he's biased, stole money from Trump, admitting he'd like to see Trump in prison and see himself in Congress. Ordinarily, that would not make for a great witness. On the other hand, the heart of the Trump defense was cut out by trial judge Juan Marchand, who ruled an election law expert could not fully explain the law to the jury. I was in that New York courtroom last week and must admit it was a curious ruling, in part because Michael Cohen himself was allowed to testify as to the lawfulness of the catch and kill plan. So Michael Cohen is an FEC expert, but a real FEC expert is not. And Cohen was allowed to essentially signal to the jury that because he pled guilty, Trump must therefore be guilty too. And most judges don't allow that, and for very good reasons. It's burden shifting and it's wrong. A defendant is never required to put up a case or prove anything, but when they do call witnesses, those witnesses are fair game. Former Cohen lawyer Robert Costello testified Cohen, quote, told him, quote, "I swear to God, I don't have evidence of wrongdoing by Donald Trump." That would be very important evidence for the defense, but Costello's testimony may have been muted by bickering with the trial judge and Costello's own emails about Rudy Giuliani. All that's left is charging the jury on the law, closing argument, and the hardest part of all in litigation, which is waiting on a verdict. Andrew Cherkasky and Tom Dupree are both former federal prosecutors, and they join us now. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Andrew, let's listen to the defendant, the former president, and I'll ask you about it on the other side.
Everybody knows it's just a witch hunt. It's a political witch hunt. There was nothing wrong. They should have done it 7 years ago if they had to do it, but they didn't do that. They waited till the election. I mean, literally 7 years. They should have never been done.
I think you're going to be vindicated.
I don't know, because we have a judge who's totally conflicted, and it's very unfair to the American system. You know that better than I do.
All right, I think there was zero chance that Donald Trump was ever going to testify in this trial, and juries are instructed not to even think about that. But in reality, at least my experience, a jury is probably wondering why a defendant would hold press conferences and do interviews, but not speak directly to them. So, as a lawyer, how, if at all, do you address that with the jury come next week?
Well, Donald Trump never needed to testify because the jury already heard what he had to say. That's one of my rules that I use with my defendants, is that if the jury's already got that evidence through other means, through the prosecutors usually introducing it, there's no need for you to take the stand to say the same thing or potentially get caught in some sort of confusing type of question. So the prosecutors put on a great deal of evidence that in 2016 and even rolling into 2017, Donald Trump seemed to have the intentions to kill the Stormy Daniels story, to protect his reputation as a celebrity, as a family man, and certainly some consideration for purposes of the election. But there was no evidence that he had made statements that were particularly incriminating, especially dealing with the most fundamental elements here, and that's the idea that the legal expenditure entry into the accounting books was improper. It's not like he put construction costs or charitable donation. So they heard what he has to say through evidence that the prosecutors presented. He didn't need to take the stand.
All right, Tom, I want you to put your old prosecutor hat on. The defense is going to harp on the baggage Michael Cohen has, and it's a lot. It's bias, it's perjury, it's animosity, it's revenge, it's ambition. But the prosecution is likely to say, you know what, all of that's true. All of that is true. But we did not pick him as a witness. If we were picking witnesses, we would have picked a Catholic nun or a first-grade school teacher or a veterinarian. Trump picked him. Trump picked Cohen because that's who he chose to deal with. How would you deal with that if you were giving summation?
Well, that's kind of how I'd try to pitch it, Trey. Look, the fact is Cohen was one of the least credible witnesses probably in American history. And prosecutors, like generals, go to war with the army they got. And in this case, I don't think they had much choice other than to rest their case on Michael Cohen. They knew going in that it was going to be an absolute debacle on cross-examination, and that proved true. I thought the Trump defense team did a masterful job of further undermining his credibility. Not that they needed a lot of help in doing it, because Cohen has basically self-indicted himself over the years. But if you're in the prosecutor's shoes and it comes time to closing argument, I think that's how you have to pitch it. You have to say, look, we never put Michael Cohen up as an angel, but he was close to Trump. He did know what happened. He was trusted by Trump, at least at one point in time, as his lawyer. And although he was lying then, he wasn't lying now. I don't know if the jury's going to buy it, but I don't think the prosecutors have many other choice.
All right, Andrew, you're sitting with the defense counsel right now trying to figure out whether or not to allow for a lesser included offense. I know there's an argument the statutes run. I don't know whether you can waive that, but do you want a compromise misdemeanor verdict, or do you want it to be felony or nothing? What are you arguing for with the jury instructions and the verdict form?
I want a straight verdict, and I want that verdict to be an acquittal, not guilty. That's what I'm going for. I think the defense could make a terrible mistake in asking for the lesser included, because the statute of limitations is a waivable issue for the defense. And so I think that by asking for the lesser included of just the misdemeanor, I think they effectively waive that issue. That said, I think the strongest defense in this case is to attack the misdemeanor crime itself, not the escalating felony additional charge.
All right, Tom, before I let you go, you got to tell me how you would handle Costello. The substance of what he said was good, but his demeanor, I was there watching it, was off-putting, to be candid. So how do you deal with that in summation with the jury?
Yeah, look, I think in retrospect, I am confident that the defense team, if they had to do it over, they would have declined to call Costello. In my view, at least, it was a bit piling on. I think they had already undercut Cohen's credibility. They didn't need to get Costello to do it. But look, they called him, and you're right. His testimony was not great. He got crosswise with the judge. And although the jury was escorted out when the judge lectured him, I think they're going to see there was friction. I think the prosecutors have to focus the jury on Costello's testimony, not his demeanor.
All right, I would tell you both to send me a bill, but I don't make enough to pay it. So just consider this pro bono work. Both of y'all, thank you for joining us on a Sunday night. I got a suspicion I'll be talking to you both again at some point about this or another matter. Thank you both.
Thank you, Trey.
Thanks.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.